Hello, my name is Amanda Lopez. I serve as the Assistant Director for Campus Activities in the Office of Student Life and Leadership. For our session today, we're going to be discussing free speech on campus and your organization. I use she, her pronouns, and we'll go ahead and get started. So for our time together, what we'll do is we'll go over just like the First Amendment and some policies that the university follows and has so that student orgs and or off-campus visitors can engage in free speech activity on campus. So just some of our like governing documents on how we manage free speech on campus. And then we'll talk about the university's response to free speech and how we support activity on campus and discussing our procedures and strategies. And then we'll finish up with some event planning and resources for your student org should you want to have or host any events that are related to free speech. And then we'll wrap up with some questions for you to kind of gauge making sure you're getting the information. So to start, the guidance that we use for free speech activities, of course, is the First Amendment to start. But then we'll go into the difference of time, place, and manner. I know we use that language a lot and when referring to the policies. And so we'll discuss what that means and how we use it in practice on our campus and sharing some examples. So we'll discuss the interim system-wide policy on time, place, and manner, our CSUF campus addendum, and then we'll also just reference the Student Life and Leadership Handbook. So as we kind of narrow in on our campus and our student orgs response, it has more information on time, place, and manner on our campus. Student Life and Leadership does this primarily through two ways, which is venue reservations and our amplified sound policy, which we'll go through together. So, of course, the First Amendment is kind of the primary governing document when we're talking about free speech activity on campus, which does state that basically Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free speech, exercise thereof, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to assemble. And so when we talk about this, we're talking about free speech, and it's the right to assemble, the right to express your speech and how you choose. That being said, it isn't necessarily a kind of end all be all, right? So this isn't an absolute guarantee. The constitutional guarantee to free speech does not preclude reasonable restrictions unrelated to content. So if there's one thing we want you to get out of this session is that it is these content neutral restrictions. Time, place, and manner is referring specifically to these content neutral limitations and restrictions that we are able to put in place should speech or should an event be impacting classrooms or really university operations. And so they have to fall within these three categories of time, place, and manner. So some examples of time would be referring to the length or frequency of time that such activities could occur. So for example, this could be referring to business hours of the university. So if the business hours of the university is from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., then events should be taking place between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. So depending on what that is or building operations, if it's in the TSU, et cetera, hours of operation. Second would be the place, which is referring to specifications on the areas of campus that can be used. So a couple examples that we're going to go over today are reservations. So some spaces may require reservation or reservations just take priority to that space. And or for safety reasons or accessibility reasons. So the speech or gathering cannot impede on fire lanes or block walkways for accessibility reasons. So in terms of the physical space where these events are taking place. And then lastly, of course, may not limit content, but instead relate to the form of communication. So specifically relating to volume, just to not affect the academic mission of the university. So an example of this is our amplified sound policy, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. But if the speech or the activity or the event is impacting classrooms, and we do have the opportunity or the option to ask that event to either stop using the amplified sound or to lower the volume on that, just so that it's not impeding on the academic mission and limiting other folks' access to learn or attend other events, etc. Okay, so as I shared, the two ways that student life and leadership does this is specifically through venue reservations and amplified sound. So venue reservations are our office specifically oversees most of the outdoor venues that you have access to reserve. So the quads, the Central Quad, the Humanities Quad, Tuffy Lawn, these various spaces where you may host events, and we manage those reservations for that. Registered student orgs and campus departments do have priority, especially with an approved reservation. Those have priority of the venue over any spontaneous activity. Spontaneous speech should not take place in a reserved venue. So if you are hosting an event and that space is reserved, then you have priority to that space. And any spontaneous speech would be either asked to relocate or advised to go somewhere else because you have that reservation and that space held for you. Of course, our office is always available and accessible to any folks those event coordinators who are hosting events and maybe those quads or those areas managed by us, so that you can contact us if needed if there's any issues with your reservation or with folks accessing that space when you do have that reservation. The second area is our amplified sound policy. So amplified sound is approved from 12 to 1. That's kind of an open time frame in designated areas. So of course, student orgs and campus departments have events that are outside of that 12 to 1 area or time frame. And folks are able to do that. We just ask that you all complete and submit an amplified sound request form. And this is part of the event approval process. So when you're putting in your event and you're indicating that you want amplified sound outside of that hour, we'll have you submit a form where you essentially we're notifying any potentially impacted colleges of the amplified sound that's taking place. So it's more of an FYI. It's not necessarily an approval, but it just has the date of contact information should the speech be impacting classrooms or anything like that. And those notifications go out to the deans of every college. So someone from the college specifically would be reaching out should there be noise levels that is impacting colleges or classrooms. It's important to note that there's only specific areas on campus that are approved for amplified sound. So this includes Becker Amphitheater, the main quad, Humanities and Social Science quad, and Tuffy Lawn. And of course, for the most part, amplified sound should only be occurring in those areas. So I know sometimes a lot of folks want amplified sound on Titan Walk or in that area, but given its proximity to Becker Amphitheater and other things, it's not a space that is approved for amplified sound. Okay. Referring specifically to like locations and safety, this is not a map that is expected for you all to know or see or have memorized, but here's kind of a conversation when we are providing some advisement on if a student org is hosting a march or something like that. We will most likely have a conversation of like route and location of gathering. And so we want to advise you to not be meeting or stopping in any area that is a fire lane because we want to try to set you up for success so that there isn't necessarily like a gathering and then we have to come up and have a conversation of, hey, can you have your group or have your folks kind of move to this side so we're not blocking a fire lane. So really our approach in supporting student org events specifically is to have these conversations during the event approval process leading up to the event so that folks kind of know how to work within the policy to ensure that their events are able to occur without any additional, check-ins or guidelines or changes to be needed. So an example of this is if we're having a conversation and there is a march taking place that you want to stop outside, either like McCarthy Hall or the student union, we'll probably have a conversation of maybe you don't stop on this side of the walkway, but maybe you can collect it on this other side. So just being mindful of where your group is kind of gathering and making sure we're not blocking any fire lanes, but also just not blocking the walkway. We want to make sure that there's enough space for folks to either walk past, get through if they want to, and for obviously accessibility and ADA reasons as well. So those are just a few things and conversations that we'll have. Again, all of these policies or these like restrictions that we're putting in place and guidelines are content neutral. So it doesn't matter what the event is. It doesn't matter the details of the information that's being shared. These are just simple content neutral guidelines that we have to meet when we are providing advisement on certain events and when we're hosting events on campus. So here is just a quick QR code to the interim system-wide policy. So as I shared, the CSU system did create this system-wide policy last August. So we've had this for about a year now, which has been helpful because the CSU system now has some common language across the system that we can use when we're talking about time, place, and manner. Generally, the TPM or the language TPM isn't new to our campus. We have had a time, place, and manner policy for some time now, but it's helpful because it kind of creates more consistent language across the university system. And so this is just a reference point. Hopefully, this isn't the first time you're seeing it since we've been in about a year now with the new policy. So it's been kind of shared with folks widely. So that is a system-wide policy. And then each campus was tasked with creating an addendum specific to their university, which outlines specific areas, locations, kind of now that we have this common language, it helps pare it down of where can certain events take place, what are the guidelines, et cetera. So this is a link specifically to the CSUF campus addendum. So as I shared, there's this common language that we have provided or that the system has created referring to properties and areas of the campus. And so I want to just kind of share like there's three different categories that of reservations or spaces. Not all of them have reservations, but different areas of properties. And this is just kind of the example, and then we can talk about the definitions of what each category means. So public areas is specifically referring to these outdoor spaces that are managed by student life and leadership. So specifically relating to Titan Walk, the Titan Walk lawn, courtyards, some of the patios, not all of them, but some of the patios, and then ECS lawn, humanity, all the quads. So all of these spaces are managed by student life and leadership. These are areas where you basically can reserve to have, again, that priority. But if it's a space that is not reserved or, then spontaneous activity can occur. So if there's no reservation in the quad and you want to gather, then that's an option for you. Those are those public areas. Again, reservations take priority over everything, but if there's no reservation, then spontaneous activity can occur. Then there's this middle category of limited areas. So these are areas that are managed by ASI and the University Conference Center. So this includes the Titan Student Union, the TSU patios, the Student Rec Center, but also the housing spaces. So those meeting rooms and the NPR, anything in housing. And then also anything managed by athletics. So athletics facilities, the gym, the intramural fields. And this kind of makes sense, Becker, also in the library. This makes sense when there's areas that aren't necessarily just like open to gather in general, but you may have access to use some of them. However, they may require either like a fee, there may be a fee associated with it or something else. So you may have access to them to host an event, but without a reservation, they're not usually spaces that you're able to use. And then lastly is the non-public area. So it makes sense when we're talking about like the Children's Center, the Ruby Gerontology Center, El Dorado Ranch. It kind of talks about these more specific locations where they're non-public. There's other reasons why they're specifically limited. It's not space that you would be able to reserve or have access to. And then there's kind of a subset of that for safety reasons or just general public, like general availability areas. So fire lanes for safety reasons, obviously, that's not an area where we can block or assemble. ADA paths of travel. And then, of course, anything that's not listed, anything that's not mentioned kind of would fall under this non-public area. And then we have a little asterisk near the areas that are approved for amplified sound in that 12 to 1 hour. So although you may be able to gather in some of these non-public spaces, you wouldn't be able to have amplified sound if there's no reservations, right? So there's some parts of the policy that apply in different ways, but that's kind of just to show what each category is in terms of the list of them. And then this is all in the campus addendum. And then here's more of the like official language. And this updated language is actually in the CSU policy. So in the interim system-wide policy. So they gave us these three categories and then campus decided which locations, which venues kind of fall under each category. So those public areas are those outdoor spaces and spaces managed by student life and leadership. And folks are able to have access to it. They're available for public assemblies, marches, protests, etc., as long as they're lawful and do not disrupt university operations. And so once an event is a reserved, as we talked about, reservations always take priority. As soon as your event is approved and it is, approved by our office and you have that reservation, that falls under the category of university operations. And so because it's an approved event, it's that reservation, that's why that has priority. So a spontaneous activity should not be occurring and disrupting an event or a student org event that has been approved by our office. If there is no reservation and these are just open, then of course, those are spaces where it's kind of anyone could have access to because there's not a reservation for that date or time. And then those limited areas are available to the public, but either due to business operations or safety concerns, it's not open for assembly, marching, or demonstrating. So oftentimes folks have access to these spaces, specifically student orgs or campus departments, but it must be scheduled and registered in advance. And so also important to note that some of these will have cost or other fees required or a part of it. And then those non-public areas are basically anything that is not public or limit area would fall under those non-public areas. So interiors of all buildings and facilities are also considered non-public areas, and they are not open to the public for gathering, etc. So again, the important thing to note across all of these things is although there may be restrictions or requirements, all of those still need to be content neutral. So even though it's not public for gathering, the restrictions are going to be content neutral. So there are no hours that are open, or other areas that have hours that are specific, right? So these different specifications and guidelines still need to be content viewpoint neutral. So it's an important distinction to make. And then in the policy, the policy is quite lengthy, and of course it is our responsibility as a campus community to understand the policy and to see the policy and know it and at least know how to access it as needed. But it's important to know, I want to just highlight, there's two different sections that either we've had a lot of questions about or they're new to our campus in the last couple of years. And so we want to make sure to just share and really hone in on these two different things. So under the very long list of prohibited activities and uses on university property, the first one I want to chat about is no temporary or permanent structures, walls, barriers, barricades, furniture, or other objects. And so I think it's important to know this is a transition for our campus because I'm sure you all have seen in the past, sometimes we get visitors or community members just kind of come, pop up a tent, table, and hand out, distribute things on campus. And with the new policy, that's no longer permitted. And so folks and off-campus guests are still allowed to table on campus, but that would be based on availability on Titan Walk. So as you know, Titan Walk gets really busy, especially certain times of the year. And so student orgs and campus department do have priority to that. But if there are off-campus groups that want a table and there's a table available, they do have that option to reserve space with our office to have a space on Titan Walk. That being said, we know it's a transition for community members and also students. Back to that point of, Titan Walk being busy, even for student orgs, if you're looking to host a tabling or promote something, you're not able to do that just anywhere on campus. You are required to have that reservation and you are required to do that through Titan Link or have that space reserved on our campus. And so I know, again, sometimes there's not enough space for all the folks who do want to table. And so it's really important you get those reservations in early because in the event that Titan Walk is full on the day that you want it, you're not allowed to just pop up an additional table on the end of Titan Walk and try to promote your event or your club. It is required that it is an approved reservation. And so those temporary tents, booths, platforms are not permitted. And we know this is kind of a learning curve for our community members, but also just like campus, folks on campus as well, since that was something that was permitted before. So yeah, get your reservations in early, and then we'll continue to have those conversations with those community members because we know for some of them, the transition's been quite easy for them to just reserve a space with our office, but for some other folks who are used to kind of just popping a table up in the quad or on the promenade, they're still wanting and choosing to do that, but it's a work in progress. And then the second one is specifically referring to refusal to disclose identification when violating university policy or applicable laws. And this one is specifically referring to wearing masks. So the CSU system actually had to change the language on this a little bit because it was confusing at first. I think it was being interpreted initially as not being allowed to wear masks, which of course is not the intention of the policy. The policy is that you're not able to wear a mask or a face covering to hide who you are when you are breaking a policy or a law. And so I think it's important that we share that wearing masks is permissible, of course, when you are complying with university policies and applicable law. But the thing that I want to make sure to share with everyone and know that folks know is that you are required to identify yourself when folks are asking in the capacity of responding to the free speech activity. So if someone from Student Life and Leadership or the Quad Squad or UPD or someone else is asking you to identify yourself, you are required to. However, if it is a faculty member or community member who's just simply saying, hey, you're not allowed to wear a mask, what's your name? That's not a time that you are required to disclose who you are. And I just want to share that we know a lot of folks are more comfortable remaining masked when they're demonstrating and doing that. And that, of course, is permissible, and you're able to do that as long as you are working within the policy and making sure that you are following the policy and the guidelines. That being said, through our event approval process, we do have a lot of conversations with the event planner leading up to the event, right? So I'm usually meeting with those students who are leading and planning that event and that demonstration. And so if there was a policy and we need to remind students of a policy and maybe we need to reiterate that, usually what we would do is myself or someone else from our office would go up to that event planner and say, hey, this student that is at your event is breaking this policy. Can we remind them and give that opportunity to either correct the behavior? And I can think of examples of like amplified sound in a space where it's not approved to be amplified, or amplified sound can't be moving. So maybe some folks are moving with amplified sound. So I think those are kind of examples where we'll still approach the event planner, but in those extreme circumstances where we maybe would need someone to identify themselves, or we try to work with the event planner and they don't know who that person is, or that person isn't listening to the event planner, then we would have that conversation with the individual who may be breaking the policy. So I just want to make sure to kind of differentiate between, yes, of course you can wear a mask. It's more nuanced of like if you're breaking a policy and someone, either myself, UPD, someone else operating in the capacity of responding to free speech activity, those are the folks that you would need to share who you were. Yeah, I think that's it on that. Of course, you can always ask questions or send me an email if you need any clarification on these. Again, the policy is very long. So these are just the bigger changes or, clarifications that we want to make sure students are aware of, and the campus community. So we're always happy to chat about it and revisit and talk about stuff as needed. So procedures and strategies. So I just want to share a little bit about Student Life and Leadership's approach to supporting free speech activity on campus. And I know I kind of already shared the Quad Squad without saying who it was. So I want to kind of share a little bit more about the university's response to free speech and how we work to support students. So the Quad Squad, who we are, is the Quad Squad is made up of a group of about 30 professional staff members who all work within the Division of Student Affairs. And although it's managed and housed in our office, in the Office of Student Life and Leadership, but it is staffed by people across the division. And so I know sometimes at some events you may see folks and be like, oh, they work in CAPS or they work in housing. Why are they out here at this event? And I think it's important because we feel that it's all of our roles to support free speech activity on campus and to support students and be that physical presence. And so we do ask for support from across the division. And just some of the roles of what we do the day of is provide visual support during that free speech activity. So sometimes we're just there in our visors answering questions if students have questions on why someone's allowed to be on campus or clarification on something or who's hosting an event, if it's a student org event or campus department, those types of questions that we can kind of clarify and just be there as visual support. We do work with UPD and the Vice President for Student Affairs Office on ensuring students are just engaging in a way that's civil, but also just having that open communication about what response is needed, kind of eyes on the ground of what's happening, which can be really helpful to decide or to determine if additional response is needed. But we're really just there to be the eyes to support and communicate out to campus partners. We do support registered student orgs that want to host events that are free speech related on campus. And so we will go out and be staffed at those events. And then, of course, we do provide referrals and resources to any students who may be negatively impacted by speech that is happening on campus or things that they're experiencing on campus. And a few of the types of events that we come out to are, so there's a few different categories when we're talking about free speech activity on campus. So the first one is going to be non-CSUF visitors. So these are people, community members who are not affiliated with the university, most often are preachers or petitioners, folks who or guest speakers who have paid to be here, contracted to be here. And so these are folks that are coming to our campus. They were not invited to be here. They, because we're an open and a public campus in some spaces, are allowed to be here. And so in those situations, we would come out either sometimes to remind the visitors of our campus policies or inform them of our policies, and also just support students in ways that we can, should they be impacted by any speech or things that they're experiencing. The second category is going to be those registered student org events. And so those would include either rallies or marches or speakers. Sometimes if they're inviting a speaker that may be discussing a topic that could be harmful or to some folks, or is either aligned with one political belief or general belief, and then it could potentially impact some other folks. So if we think that there is an impact on really any other population or folks, we will want to be there to support and also just answer those general questions. And then lastly, non-registered student groups. So we do sometimes have groups of students who choose to gather who maybe aren't a part of a student org or registered student org or aren't operating in that capacity, and they may choose to have a rally or a march or have folks, sharing or speaking out in the quad and in these spaces. And we want to be there to support that speech as well, because, they're still students and students are engaging. And so we'll still go out and support at those events, even though it may not be a registered student org event. And so those are kind of the three areas that we most often our quad squad is supporting. And this is just our uniform. I'm sure some of you have seen us out there in our orange visors. And then we also, the orange visor is helpful way for us to, indicate who we are. And so that students can come up to us and ask us questions as needed. And that kind of goes back to if folks are asking you to identify yourself, the visor is a great indicator of knowing who is operating in the capacity of, quad squad or, supporting free speech activity on campus. And then these A-frames, the picture on the right is specifically referring to anytime we have, whether it's a club event, or just off-campus guests who are here that we think the speech could be impacting someone, or, folks, we want to give folks the option. Everyone has different levels of comfort in engaging with free speech activity. And so we want to just give a notification. If you want to walk around, you're able to. If you want to walk right into it and have that conversation, you're welcome to. You're welcome to also just walk through it. Whatever you want to do and how you want to choose to engage, that is an option. We just want to make sure that folks have that heads up or that notification if it's something that could be impactful to folks. And then we also have a QR code to the CSUF campus addendum, just so that we can, refer folks to the system-wide policy and to the Student Life and Leadership Handbook and other campus resources. All right. And I know most of our work is specifically referring to outdoor spaces. Like when we talk about Quad Squad, it's always going to be in these outdoor spaces. But obviously, some of the events that you all are hosting are indoor spaces. And so we want to circle back to the fact that they are content neutral restrictions. And so here's kind of like, as you're planning an event or as you're hosting things, what are some content neutral restrictions or, frameworks that you can put in place for your events to set yourself up for success? I know sometimes, we host events and we may be worried about someone coming up and asking certain questions or sharing maybe differing beliefs. And sometimes we want to invite that, but sometimes some events may be a little different where it's intended more for community. And we just want to talk about those content neutral restrictions and limitations that can be put in place to make sure your events are able to be done in the way that you're hoping to. So time, some examples of that is, you can have a program schedule of here's when, the Q&A, or here's when it's open for engagement and things like that. And so kind of put some limitations on when folks can kind of just openly engage with the speaker, with the members, or anyone else. And then also opportunities for engagement and audience participation. So maybe you put a time limit on, 5-10 minutes for Q&As, or Q&As with a microphone and everyone gets 2 minutes and you can turn it off. Or if you're on Zoom, you mute people after that 2-minute mark. And those time frames that you can limit and put restrictions on, but it's not necessarily on the content. Again, it cannot be on the content, but it can be general time related restrictions. Next would be place. So the location of the free speech activity. You want to be mindful of, again, anything that's happened should not be limiting other people's access to that speaker, to, that meeting or that presentation. So let's say you are giving a presentation or you're having a speaker come to your club's event and they're giving a presentation and someone stands in the front with a sign sharing honestly anything, because again, it's content neutral. But if it's a sign and it's limiting other people behind them from seeing the speaker or listening or getting that information or seeing the slides, that would be a content neutral reason to say, hey, I need you to relocate to the back. You can't tell them that they aren't allowed to have the sign or that it needs to be removed or thrown away. But, you could say, look, you are limiting other folks' ability to see this information and see the presentation. So we'll need to ask you to step to the back. So again, it should not be limiting access for other folks. Again, the other things are related to blocking walkways, accessibility ramps, etc. These are all things and reasons why we may need to ask someone to either relocate or move because it is limiting other folks' access. And then lastly would just be the manner. So obviously interrupting an entire event is not just exercising your free speech, right? Because you're limiting other folks' access to that information, to that presentation, to get that. And so because of that, either amplified sound or chanting, we could then ask someone to either quiet down, wait until the Q&A portion, and to stop that behavior should it be impacting, other folks from getting access to that information or engaging in that event. So those are just some ways and resources for like if you're hosting events that are indoors, the types of safeguards or restrictions or limits or guidelines you can put on your event so that they're still content neutral and within the time, place, and manner policy. So as we talk about TPM and as we talk about free speech, I think the conversation always comes up about what about speech that is expressing hateful feelings? And I think when we talk about hate speech, we first want to define it. So hate speech is usually speech that offends or insults a group based on race, color, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, a disability, or other traits. And they are words that are hurtful, emotionally harmful, and psychologically stunning. And oftentimes when we're out there, we get a lot of students asking, why are they allowed to be here? Why is this person able to be here and share this information when it is harmful and hateful? And I think it's important to note that the CSU as a government agency or government entity is prohibited by the First Amendment and the California Constitution from restricting speech simply because it is hateful. And so, although we may be negatively impacted by speech, we can't ask folks to stop expressing themselves because of the content of what they're sharing. That being said, that doesn't mean that it's an absolute right, right? So I think it's important to know the campus resources that we have should you be impacted by speech that is happening or speech that may be hurtful. And so we do want to reference the CSU non-discrimination policy, and it does share that freedom of expression is not an absolute right. It does coexist with other rights and need for public order and safety. And so not every act that may be offensive or insulting does constitute discrimination or harassment. But there are areas where if you feel like it is crossing that line and crossing that boundary and going over into, and it is conduct that violates the non-discrimination policy, including statements that constitute discrimination, harassment, sexual harassment, retaliation, or stalking, it isn't protected by, academic freedom or freedom of expression. And so if you feel like it is something that kind of crosses that line, we do want to share and encourage folks to report it to the Office for Civil Rights and Equity. And so we do share that link. Sorry, the text is a little wonky, but we do share that link as a resource for you if you want to report it and share that there are campus resources. So just because something may be illegal, it doesn't mean that sometimes it doesn't, cross the boundary or you feel. So we want to make sure that folks know that there are campus resources. That being said, a lot of the speech is, kind of in the in-between. Like most things, if not a lot of things, don't necessarily violate the CSU non-discrimination policy, and they don't violate the TPM policy, but that doesn't mean that it's not impactful. And so we also think it's important to share just campus resources for you, community members, your club members, or other folks to have access to and know that are available. And so if you want to just have confidential resources to talk about the speech and how it's impacted you, you have counseling and psychological services as a resource. That's CAPS. There's also campus advocates within Titan Thrive. And then lastly, if you are an employee, you have access to the Employee Assistance Program. And these are all three confidential resources. And so sometimes you just need to talk to a professional about the impact of the speech that you're hearing and maybe some things that are coming up for you when you are engaging in speech activity, but also maybe just coming across it. But if you feel like you still want to report it, again, just because, speech at face value may be legal doesn't mean that there's not other things and conversations that can be had around the speech that is taking place. And so you always have the option to report it to the Office for Civil Rights and Equity. And, if it is violating and it is going kind of crossing that legal boundary, you always have the option to report stuff to the CSUF Police Department. And so know that that's also an option. And then lastly, of course, we have the Dean of Students from a more conduct perspective of if it's violating the student code of conduct. Of course, that's the third option for more formal reporting. So we want to make sure that students know and our community knows that there are campus resources in there. It's our role and responsibility to support students when there is speech happening on campus or maybe impacting them. Okay, so what does that mean for your student org if you want to host an event? What does this look like in practice for you all? And so we want to talk about some event planning and responding to free speech activity on campus. So here is, so how can I and my organization respond? I think first and foremost, the thing we always want to reiterate with people is that the most effective course of action is to deprive the speaker of the thing they want most, which is a spectacle. So when we're talking about maybe some of these visitors that are coming to campus who maybe a majority of you don't agree with and don't feel like it's an accurate representation of how you or our community feels about something, I think a lot of these community members or folks from non-CSUF are coming on campus trying to get either our campus riled up. They're trying to get videos to post on TikTok. They're trying to get sound bites. That's what they're coming for. That's why they're recording. That's why they are wearing a camera. That is their goal. And so if we as a campus community are giving them that and we're giving them more content, those folks are going to stay here and they're going to continue to come to our campus. And so I think the one thing we encourage folks is if you don't agree with it and you don't want them to be here, it's most beneficial to just be on your way, go to class, go do something else, and don't give them that audience that they are looking for. That being said, there's plenty of other options on how you can choose to engage. It's entirely up to you, and what you feel the safest, the best doing, right? And so you can, of course, engage with those folks, speak out against the event, share a counter narrative, raise awareness that there is a counter narrative, share your perspective or other folks or advocating for other folks. That's always an option to engage. You can also organize something else. You can organize a counter demonstration away from the event in another space. Like you can always host something or work with campus departments or other campus resources who maybe share a counter perspective. You can meet with them and host something as a group, as a student org with other campus departments. That's an option. I think above all, what we really, really encourage you all to do is to avoid confrontation with the speakers and with any supporters of those speakers. And so I think my one and biggest recommendation as we talk about as these people come to campus, they have cameras, they're filming, they're looking for that engagement with our students. And so if you are choosing to engage in a dialogue with that person, we highly recommend that there is a physical space between you and this person, because like I shared, they're recording. They are looking for any opportunity to either, interact with you, have that physical contact so that they can then say, oh, this person harmed me, this person assaulted me, etc., and then have that video footage to then, share it with law enforcement or with other folks. So we want to encourage you all to be safe and protect yourselves and engage as you feel comfortable, but also make sure to prioritize yourself and your safety and making sure that there is that physical barrier between you and anyone else that you're choosing to engage with. And then, of course, here's just a website for some resources should you choose to demonstrate, have some events and really utilize your the same rights that you have for free speech and gathering and you want to do that. So the Southern Poverty Law Center has some resources on, collective community and action and things like that. So that's a resource for you as well. So let's say you are motivated and you want to host an event. What are some resources that you have for your student, for your club, for you as a group to host an event or to do something? So, of course, the event approval process and space reservations is the very first place that I'm going to encourage you to start. Titan Link is a way for you to reserve that space and have that venue for your event, for your demonstration. And we'll kind of meet from that once you submit that form. We'll have a consultation meeting. In most cases, it's with me, but someone else from our office where we can talk about what you have in mind for your event and what you have planned and how we can make sure to work within the policy to bring your vision to life. So sometimes in those consultation meetings, I'll ask, what do you have in mind? What do you want for your event? And, sometimes we work within, okay, maybe you want folks to chalk everywhere. And maybe we have to think critically of, it's my role to help. How can we work within the policy? How can we get creative? So although chalking is not permitted within the policy, maybe we put a tarp down and we still paint the tarp or the butcher paper or whatever, right? Like, how can we get creative to still have the same impact that you're looking for that is within the policy? So it's really what the consultation meetings are helpful with or helpful to do. And then we also may have you come to a CAC meeting, which is our Campus Activities Committee, which is made up of campus departments, and they really help advise on large-scale events, but also maybe just demonstrations and gatherings. And it's it's an opportunity for us to have all of those conversations on the front end, so in preparation for your event, so that you can revisit the policy, be mindful of, like I said, we can talk about how to be within the policy so that your event the day of, you can host it without any, corrections or redirections needed. So we want to make sure that you all are informed of the policy and expectations before your event date. So CAC meeting is a great opportunity to meet with various campus partners, either risk management, UPD, and having those conversations ahead of time. As we shared, Quad Squad is always a resource. In instances where we feel like the Quad Squad would be supported or would be able to be supportive to the event and to answer those questions. What we'll do is we will schedule Quad Squad there. So we'll have usually between 2 and 4 folks, depending on the scale of the event, there for the duration of your event to either answer questions, be that support, really just do our part to, ensure that we're answering questions and providing referrals to resources as needed when referring to time, place, and manner. And then just some, reminders of the policies. So as we kind of narrow in, so we have time, place, and manner from the chancellor's office, and then from there we have our campus addendum, and then our student life and leadership has some more specifics. So it's a lot of information, as I shared. And so as we meet through our consultation meetings, as we meet through stuff, we're always going to review these documents and maybe talk about referencing some of those things and making sure that your events are successful. And so these three are really our governing documents when we're talking about, and our guidelines when we're talking about free speech activity on campus. And then just as we kind of wrap up our time today and in this session, I just want to share that, our office is here to support you and your organization, but be mindful and take care of yourself. Whether you're doing the work or just being impacted by speech on campus, it can be exhausting. It can be a lot on you, and you all are whole beings with work and school and life. And so make sure that you're taking care of yourselves when you're doing work and or, coming across this. Sometimes when there's speech on campus and it's impacting you, it's always at, the least ideal times when you're on your way to a midterm or, trying to study. And so just be mindful that you should be taking care of yourselves and taking care of your community, right? So as difficult as it may be, we really encourage you to just not personalize the content of the speech, especially sometimes when we have these off-campus groups coming to campus that are, sharing things that you really disagree with, that you may really disagree with. I think, those folks are professionals. They're here trying to rile students up, trying to get a counter, somebody who wants to counter them so that they can have that information. And so don't try to not let it get to you in the sense of it, impacting you on a deeper level. So try to not personalize it as much as possible. But also take time to decompress, de-stress, and discuss things with people who are like-minded. I think the nice thing about, when there is speech on campus, it's kind of an opportunity to get eyes on oh, there's actually a group of people who feel like they disagree with this, and that is community that you can find and be a part of. And it's a way, or sometimes, I really agree with this speech, and I think that there are more people on campus who feel this way, right? And so it's a great way and a great way opportunity to find community and build community on campus with people who hold the same values as you. And so that kind of goes into the last piece of just remember that there are very, positive outcomes of free speech. And so I know sometimes when we talk about time, place, and manner, it feels very, sterile and difficult to have as a conversation of just it being policy forward. But I think it's important to note that there are so many positive outcomes when free speech is exercised and people are hosting events that are free speech related. And so I love to just end on the note of student activism is certainly free speech too. And we are here to support you all and support your events when you want to host events on campus. And so the students have such powerful voices, and you have so much power on this campus. And, we really want to allow and support you all when you are hosting these events. And like I've shared multiple times, working within the policy to make sure that you're still able to host your events without any, connection or corrections or redirections that are needed. And so we just really want to close on that note of we are here to support your events and things that you're hosting, and we want to encourage you to do them. Your voices are powerful, and we want to support that. And so just thank you to folks that over the last few years that I've been in my role, we've really, I think, built those relationships to know that we're here to support you and your club and hosting your events. And I want to just thank you for your time and thank you for the relationships that we've built. And I really hope to continue that and support you all when you are hosting events that are related to free speech on campus and know that we're here as a resource. So this is just my email. If you want to reach out, I'm always happy to do a consult or just chat about maybe something, an event that you all want to host and how we can make it work and make it work within the policy and kind of brainstorm. So I'm always here as a resource for y'all as needed. That's my email. And then that's, of course, the free speech website on our campus or for our campus addendum. So thank you. Yeah, have a great day.